The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Michelle, have we been told of anybody being...
Yes, we have. We've got Councillor Bridget Rowlands and people who are coming, Councillor Rob Stewart and Councillor Andrew Stevens. Shall I now do the roll call as well?
Yeah.
So if you could just say here. Chris Holly?
Yeah.
Phil Downing? Paxton Hood-Williams?
Present.
Linda James?
Present.
Mary Jones?
Present.
Peter Jones?
Present.
Jeff Jones?
Yes, yeah.
Irene Mann? Des Thomas?
Present, yeah.
Officers, Ben Smith?
Present.
Richard Rowlands?
Present.
And I've got two others, I think, here. Jeff Dong?
Present.
Adam Hill?
Present.
And Emily Jane Davis, who's going to be our new scrutiny officer.
Hello, present.
There we are, all done.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is disclosure of personal and prejudicial interests.
No.
No, I think it's a general declaration. My daughter works for the authority, which I have dispensation from the Standards Committee anyway. Next item on the agenda is prohibition of whip votes and declarations of party whips. Okay, goes as say. What the hell that is? Somebody got a machine gun. Okay, next item is the minutes of the previous meeting. Didn't exactly make the finest reading in the world, but I'm hoping that many of you have read them.
Of course.
Yes, I know this. Okay, everybody happy with them?
Yes.
Any issues? All right.
Yes, yeah, move.
Okay, then we come on to public questions. Michelle, have any members of the public who asked any questions?
No public questions received.
Okay, right. Then we go on to the corporate performance and financial monitoring discussion on COVID-19. The first item on that is a budget monitoring verbal report by Ben. Do you want to do that first, Ben?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got a few things to say which will sort of meander through various bits, and suffice to say we're in a period of known unknowns and unknown knowns and unknown unknowns. By way of context, first of all, I should apologise. You were expecting the first quarter report, but as will be clear when I update you, there is a reason for the slippage, as it were. What I would say is if I take a step back, first of all, Council has only just declared the statement of accounts for last year. And as I indicated at Council, that was important because it gives the bedrock of the reserves position going into the year. And whilst my officers knew the outturn position on the 18th of May, until the audit process is formally concluded, an authority doesn't know with certainty its starting position. And the reason I labour that point is that several councils in Wales are yet to have their accounts signed off. There were permissions under the coronavirus regulations to defer the accounts. I make no comment on individual authorities. I chose to stick to very challenging timelines. Yes, if I'm honest, there's an element of professional pride, and yes, there's an element of bragging rights with fellow treasurers. But it was around having great certainty as to what level of reserves I had going into a challenging period of time. The first quarter monitoring report itself, we've tried as officers to maintain normal standards in terms of monthly PFM monitoring at a granular level to build up an overall position. It's normally the case that the first quarter is really, really boring. We spend so much time worrying about the sort of closure and it being early doors that we don't do too much normally in terms of the first quarter. But of course, we're in very unusual and uncertain times. And to contextualise it, having got to a position ready to sign off as officers, the first quarter position for it to go to September's report to Cabinet, I had the temerity to go on leave on the Friday. And on the Saturday, the Welsh Government announced another 264 million quid for Wales. So my officers rightly decided to pause and see if we could get some greater clarity on that, because as you're aware, not only does the first quarter monitoring report summarise the first quarter, but it attempts to forecast for the year, and that's proving doubly incredibly difficult. I can't go into too much detail because I'd otherwise do the discourtesy of telling you more than I've formally told Cabinet, but I will refer to some of the bits that have already gone to Cabinet. You are aware that Cabinet has made some decisions, particularly in terms of leisure support, and in there I put on the formal record my overall assumptions and parameters that I was working to. I've made clear to Cabinet and to Council that the budget's been flexed by about 25%. I've flexed the revenue budget by over £100 million. I've flexed the capital budget by over £20 million. And in normal circumstances, that would have me as a treasurer holding my head in despair and shame, because literally 2 seconds after getting council to agree a budget, it got somewhat torpedoed. The saving grace I've got is everyone's in absolutely the same case. In terms of forming a view on the first quarter monitor, it is difficult because of the very nature of the way things are being announced. And I will be slightly flowery in my language because it's important that you understand it, but it is an officer view, and that's all it can be. But obviously there's a danger that it will be imbued with political overtones because of people's individual views on things. And I don't mean it to be anything other than an officer view. Since 23rd of March, there have been a flurry of announcements on almost a daily basis by the UK government. And the media is often very London-centric and England-centric. So an awful lot of the announcements you hear and read, and interested members of the public hear and read, are very much England only. There is then a period of time where the Welsh government makes its own announcements. And then, to echo what the chair was referring to previously, treasurers get together and try to work out what's fair and reasonable across Wales in conjunction with officials from Welsh government. And the big slugs of money fall into several categories, and I think it's important I labour some of the detail on these. So you've got what are traditional grant offers, and the items that I would put in that category are the big slugs of money, the £51.5 million worth of business grants, the £31 million worth of NNDR reliefs. Those are being subject to the normal grant offer terms and conditions. There is a slug of money offered to Swansea. Swansea spends the money. Swansea claims it back. Bog standard, normal grant offer, certainty of sums of money. Some issues around the timing, but a certainty of those grant offers. And as Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams has made clear on a number of occasions, the levels of specific grants are vitally, vitally important, and doubly so this year when you're talking at the stroke of a pen. That was 80 plus million pounds, £86 million just plucked out of the ether. You then have the next sort of slug of money, which has been a raft of announcements of emergency pots of funding. It started with £30 million for the hardship fund, £40 million for social care, a raft of announcements around homelessness, free school meals, and various other bits and pieces. And what you tend to see is announcements made at national level by national politicians and national officials, and then the same at a Welsh government level. And often there is a disconnect or a time lag between what is pronounced and turning it into reality. That's not meant to be critical of colleagues in the various levels of government. It's meant to recognise that at a transactional level, when it boils down to paying a free school meal payment to an individual family or paying an individual grant to an individual business, we have a much more local arrangement and relationship with those people than big government. So there's been a partnership working to try and ultimately create things at pace and get it out to people locally. The reason I label those items as different is that they are national pots that have ebbed, flowed, grown bigger as more and more announcements, and it's proven incredibly difficult to keep tabs at national level and local level on what exactly has been announced when. It feels like on a daily basis there's a new slug of money announced from a magic money tree produced somewhere at some level of government. And that's where you then get added uncertainty, because there's no specific grant offer to Swansea. All 22 authorities go through what I would paraphrase as a bit of a beauty parade in front of officials and ministers to work out what is fair and reasonable to allocate those sums. It's a competitive process. It's also the case that it's quite time consuming for officers and quite time consuming in terms of getting the position firmed up. So the first quarter is obviously April, May, June. But if I go to the June position, you get to the end of June, you submit a claim in July, and it gets split into 3 bits. There's a tranche 1 payment that you can expect the following month, a tranche 2 payment that if you're lucky will be paid the following month after that. And then there's the controversial bits which go to a Welsh Government officer panel. And again, that's designed to try and treat everyone fairly and evenly, recognising there were 22 separate local authorities in Wales. And what it means is you sort of end up only knowing in September, October what your firm June position is, which does make it rather difficult for me to give you a microscopic and forensic assessment of the position. So I've very much adopted an approach of doing what we can locally to capture stuff. And as I've indicated in that report to Cabinet, when there were some decisions about leisure arrangements, we've flexed the budget by a 9-figure sum, revenue-wise, over £100 million. I expect services, all services, to be overspent. I've referred to it being an 8-figure sum. That's tens of millions. And I expect there to be pressure on the authority as a whole for the whole of this year. But I go back to what I said at the beginning. I knew how much money I had coming forward. You had the outturn report and then the statement of accounts signed off, which meant £19 million rolled forward to be added to our reserves for me to be able to make some pretty big decisions at officer recommendation level and some big decisions that councillors have had to take. So you have the obvious example of the field hospital financed with our reserves before anyone else could get their hands on any cash to be able to do it, and then a process of engagement with the NHS and Welsh Government to get the money back. So we've seen large amounts ebbing and flowing with a degree of uncertainty. But my approach has been to try and say, manage it as a macro whole and we'll be okay for the year. That's an unusual position to be in, but one that I find myself in exactly the same position as 21 other treasurers. And then there's an inevitability of still trying to keep the day-to-day stuff going. So that's collecting bills where they're due in terms of council tax and non-domestic rates. And it will come as no surprise that there are some pressures there. People's ability to pay is deteriorating. And also we've switched into giving out vast sums of money for a period of time. But it's equally the case that we still need to make sure that there's plenty of cash in the bank to be able to pay the payroll at the end of the month, to pay pensioners at the end of the month, to pay suppliers at the end of the month, to hand over money to HMRC, because the VAT and other concessions that have been granted only apply to the private sector. We've still got money flowing in and flowing out. So it's been a challenging approach, and clearly trying to forecast for the rest of the year is itself imbued with difficulty. The financial year will end on the 31st of March, and I've got to factor in the risks of further announcements at a national level on what's happening with the pandemic. I am awaiting a comprehensive spending review. I am awaiting a Welsh Government budget settlement, which is likely to be very late in the day, exactly the same as last year. And the Brexit issue will impact on the current year. 1st of January, there will be an impact, not for me to opine on what it is, but there will be an impact in the current year. And clearly, there'll be an impact on all of those matters in future years. And I am still legally required to follow the law, which is to ensure that at all times I've got sufficient cash and resource cover for the authority, both in the current year and for the foreseeable future. And when it comes to setting a budget, I am legally required to ensure that you as a council set a budget by the 11th of March. So my approach has been as far as possible to not make money an impediment to the big decisions that officers and members have had to take. But clearly, if one got to a position where one didn't have any money, that would become an impediment. So, and it's kind of worked to date, and you will get the granularity of a report to Cabinet in October, which sets out more formally the position with some specifics for you to be able to ask me further questions and members further questions. So as I say, I go back to what I said at the beginning. I apologise for you not having the granularity before you. There was a reason for it. We are in uncertain times. And we will continue to be in uncertain times as we go forward. I remain as relaxed as I can be in the circumstances. You've heard this phrase from me before. I remain as relaxed as I can be in the circumstances for the current year. I think it's fair to say all authorities know they will have difficult balancing acts and difficult choices to make for coming years, and it will be heavily influenced by a whole raft of national events. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ben, for a report which lends itself to far more questions than you could possibly answer, I would think. I'll go around everyone now and ask them have they got any questions. Could you put your hand up on the screen so that I can come to you, please? Paxton Hood-Williams first.
Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams.
That's okay. Okay, thanks, Chairman. Just a simple question, basically. And I suppose the key question at the end of the day, have we had to spend extra money, which has been more than the extra money that we're going to be receiving? Sorry, what I'm asking really, are we going to be in a situation where we'll be having to spend more money than we've received?
It's a very difficult question to answer, I would think.
Well, that's a key question at the end of the day, I guess.
At this point in time, it is my expectation that we will spend more than we receive. Now, time will tell, because as I indicated, just recently another £264 million was allocated to local government. That falls into the category of being money you competitively bid for. So I've got no idea what share I'll get. I mean, all treasurers have a view as to what's a fair share for their authority, but it is a competitive process. We won't know with certainty until we get further into the year. But the reason I can boldly assert that we will spend more money than we get is, again, Welsh Government are meeting a substantial amount of the costs, but there are some items of spend where they've said explicitly they'll only fund 50% of the cost. And there are some items where they've said they will fund absolutely zero of the cost. Now that's deliberately provocative and emotive in one sense, but it's the items which are local choice. The two items that went through Cabinet in July around decisions to provide leisure support, you saw my officer comments. They were local choice decisions by local members for the perfectly valid reasons set out in the report, but the Welsh Government has been consistent, as has been the UK government with authorities across both England and Wales and into Scotland. They will not fund centrally things where local choices are made. That's perfectly reasonable position to be in. So I can say with certainty we will spend more than we get back. That is an inevitability. The dark art element of it is getting as much back as possible from finite sums in a competitive process with 21 other treasurers. And working with Welsh officials to end up with as fair and reasonable an outcome for each of the authorities as we can have, recognising that we've all got individual differences and individual circumstances. So I'm absolutely certain, Councillor, that we will spend more than we get back. There is a burden to be shared here across the public sector.
So what follows on from that is which areas of our budget are going to have to take a significant hit on that basis?
You can't answer that, I don't think.
You're right, Chair. I can't answer that directly. I've made clear that I expect all services to be in an overspend position. The answer in the individual ones will depend on what we get back from the individual pots of money, which are a competitive process. Time will tell nearer to the end of the year as to which ones we've been successful on and which ones we haven't.
Jeff Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. Ben?
Yeah, I think Ben has answered a lot of the questions that I was going to ask, because Paxton actually brought up anyway. With this 264 million, you actually said it's competitive. I'm assuming this is competitive every year with regards to sums of money that are allocated. Is there some sort of pattern with regards to what Swansea will end up with? Because if we divide that by 22, it's 12-13 million pounds. So are we expecting about 12 or 13 million, or do we proportionally perhaps get 50 million, or do we end up with 2 million? And also as well, you actually mentioned about some of the monies we, won't get back. I saw an article in the paper, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, with regards to council tax. I think from the figures in the paper, I worked it out that the council tax, should we say, arrears is about £5 million at the present time. Is that right, or is it wrong?
Well, certainly on your first point, to clarify, Councillor Jones, the £264 million is a one-off additional sum of money. So it is very much not like previous years. It builds on the other additional one-off sums of money that have been announced in year. And it goes back to the point I was labouring with Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams, that These are very much not like any normal grant offers. Normal grant offers are a specific sum of money to individual authorities. As a broad yardstick, depending on which service it is, this authority, given its relative size and density, would expect to get between 7 and 8% of any national pot announced. But these are very much targeted to specific claims, depending on individual circumstances. So if you did the maths on that, between 7 and 8%, a fair share would be in the order of 17, 18 million pounds. The issue we have is there is no detail as yet as to who is going to get what for the rest of the year. We've had some indications from Welsh Government officials as to what the main areas that they expect us to spend the money on are likely to be, but it's very unusual. We normally get a specific grant allocation and we spend to it. Here we are spending money and then seeking competitively to try and get as much as we can back, trying to be as fair and even-handed, because we recognise that there's a finite pot for all authorities to bid for. In terms of council tax, don't forget council tax arrears sit there for many, many years. I don't have an exact figure in front of me, but that would be normal pattern in year at this point in time. Again, we're taking a snapshot at this point in time, and to contextualise, that's one of the reasons why Welsh Government officials, when they've listened to local government, and I would pay tribute to Welsh Government officials, we've had more dealings than ever with them. You know, we've been talking, we're down to fortnightly meetings, but we were meeting weekly, and I was probably having about another 3 or 4 meetings a week with individual working groups. One of the reasons the Welsh Government is looking at the position is that, yes, there are some slippages in council tax payments and in non-domestic rate payments. We've seen council tax reduction scheme costs go up, and the Welsh Government has indicated it will meet some of those council tax reduction scheme costs, but they've made no decision on the overall support that may or may not be available for council tax. As you know, council tax is a very localised tax. In normal circumstances, individual authorities are meant to live and stand by what happens locally, but there will be a tipping point at which, if the losses are too big, that the Welsh Government will need to consider whether to support it or not. You'll equally be aware from the reports I've done at Outturn for the previous 2 years, we posted a collection fund deficit 2 years ago of about £300,000. With only a week of the pandemic, the deficit doubled last year to about £700,000. And again, I go back to the point I made, which is you get the rather English-centric media national reporting, because there's a whole raft of reports about wheezes and ruses that may be considered by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government to enable authorities to spread losses over the next 3 years. Those rules don't apply in Wales because the legislation is different and the technical accounting arrangements are different. If the legislation is changed and if the accounting code of practice is changed, we may have the same arrangements as England, but at the moment, Scotland and Wales and England, as you've seen in a whole raft of other policy announcements, there is some divergence in terms of the day-to-day operation of things, and there will be some wrinkles to iron out. At this stage, it's not a figure that overly concerns me at this point in time in the year, and that's the position the Welsh Government is taking. But my starting presumption at the moment is losses on the collection fund on council tax will fall locally because it is a local tax. That may change in due course. It's the exact opposite to non-domestic rates, where I'm merely collection agent and ultimately the losses fall to Welsh Government. But as all members on the call will be aware, if there is ultimately a loss on the collection fund for the national pool, that ultimately feeds through into next year's support grant. So you see the iteration and the circularity of an awful lot of these arguments. And it goes back to what I said about unknowns.
Okay, Peter Jones. Sorry, Jeff, you had all your questions answered, okay? All right. Then Peter Jones, please.
The only thing, Ben was actually...
Thank you, Chair.
On, Peter. Yeah, Ben was actually
well, first of all, Ben has largely, in his answers to previous questions, met certainly the context of what I want to ask. And maybe what I'm going to ask is slightly unfair and maybe even cheeky, but listening to what Ben was saying about the likely eventual outturn in terms of income against expenditure, courtesy of COVID and so forth, are we likely at some point between now and next March to face the need for, shall we say, a major budget revision, i.e. What you might even go so far as call an emergency budget, in the light of the circumstances that we may be facing over the next few months. I appreciate entirely Ben's points about known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and we really do not know, and I appreciate that, what kind of circumstances, financial and others, that we might face. But are we likely to be in such a serious position as to need a major budget revision? Maybe that's an unfair question, but heavens, I'll answer it. I'll ask it anyway. Thank you.
I don't think it at all an unfair question, Councillor Jones. You see the media commentary on a number of authorities that are clearly in significant difficulty because we're all in significantly different positions. You equally know, in terms of my appearance before Audit Committee, Scrutiny Committee, that I am forthright in my views to councillors to protect taxpayers' interests if I need to be. And I go back to what I said at the beginning, outturning last year with £19 million being able to be put into 3 separate lots of earmarked reserves has undoubtedly strengthened the authority's starting position. In terms of what I've already outlined to Cabinet in terms of the decisions they took on the leisure and culture support, I was forecasting that we would be short by a significant sum. But it is at the moment my understanding, based on all of the evidence in front of me as your technical advisor, that there will be no need for an emergency revised budget in the current year, nor anything as draconian as you see elsewhere. What I'm intending to do is to give myself some wiggle room. As you're aware, I'm required to report through to Cabinet. Cabinet exercises the executive function for in-year budget monitoring. I also am required under the SIPFA code to report once a year on annual reserves, and I am still intending to bring that to Council in November. When that report comes in November, you will see my proposals and recommendations to Council, which does set out a need to potentially draw from some reserves as being reasonable and proportionate. But on that basis of where we are at the moment, I do not see the need to formally bring back an emergency budget. It will be managed, albeit with levels of variation that are utterly unprecedented. I go back to what I say at the beginning, setting a budget and then ripping it up by over £100 million, no sooner had it been set, would ordinarily be jolly embarrassing, but every treasurer is in exactly the same position. Some authorities, where they've got to the point where they're running out of cash or resource cover, have already indicated and have already taken through emergency budgets across the border. I do not envisage doing that as an officer, as of my view, for the rest of the year as things stand, but clearly national announcements and national consequences which flow both from the pandemic, the financial, economic impact, could change that position. But it is my judgment call at the moment, in terms of the advice that I will give to Cabinet. I'm happy to say today, I see no need for that. There will be the need to exercise some very substantial violence across budgets, but because I am happy that overall I have sufficient cash and resource cover to get me all the way through the year, I am intending to do that through normal mechanisms, which is my executive function for Cabinet for receiving the monitoring reports, and albeit, as I say, with some challenging numbers in, but through Council for permission as an officer to give me permission to use the dark arts, to use the phrase, to balance the budget overall for the year. So it could have been a challenging and difficult question, but if you don't ask, you don't get, and I'm happy to put that as my official advice at this point in time, but with the caveat, no one actually knows what's going to quite happen throughout the rest of the year.
Thank you very much, Ben. That's very reassuring. Thank you.
Jeff, I'll come back to you. You were going to ask another question?
No, Ben was actually talking about a rolling figure. You know, he didn't give what the rolling figure actually was. As I said, I don't know where that figure in the newspaper actually came from. I worked it out at 100 times 50 or whatever it was, and it came out at £5 million. So what are we talking about as a rollover figure?
I need to give you a written response on that. I don't have those figures in front of me, Councillor Jones, but it would be arrears in a normal year are in the millions. That's normal, but I can give you a written note on the exact level of arrears and including the cumulative arrears for a number of years. I mean, part of the issue we will have is we don't know as yet, because again, these are forecasts through the year. We don't know as yet whether people are just a little bit behind with some payments, because they're having to prioritise stuff. And what we don't know, especially with the potential ending of the national furlough scheme, I mean, as an operating assumption, I'm assuming it'll get worse before it gets better because people will have less ability to pay. So there are further unknowns that makes it really difficult for me to say what the deficit on collection of council tax is for the year when we've got those big national bits still to work through. But I'm more than happy to give you a written note of the current cumulative deficit on collection on council tax collection.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else that wants to ask questions or make a comment or whatever? No. Ben, can I thank you for your very, very good verbal report. I understand where you're coming from, and I completely have some sympathy with you having to be able to look at how you're going to go forward. And I understand about the reserve position that you had at the end of the year, which is a discussion for another time. But I thank you very much for your verbal report, and please don't have any more sleepless nights. That's all I will say, because it is a very, very difficult position to be in, and I completely understand why there is a nervousness around the current finance in local government right throughout Wales. The comments about England, I think because of the different way in which it's funding education and various other things and major road projects. I think part of the problem in England is the way in which the specifics are funded and how local authorities get their grant funding as well, which is a different argument anyway. But thank you anyway. If anybody else got nothing else, thank you very much, Ben.
Thank you, Chair.
Right. Then we come on to the performance monitoring report. Annual performance monitoring report. I see Andrew Stevens, or Councillor Andrew Stevens, was to come on the call to give us a comment. And I'm not sure if he is. He has. It doesn't appear
he's
that
given his apologies. Sorry, he's given his apologies last minute, I'm afraid.
Okay, then
Richard Rowlands is here to outline the issues.
Can I ask Richard if he could start off by giving us a brief outline on it, and then obviously it's such a huge report. I think if anybody has any comments, then we'll go through it. Okay, so Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone. So yeah, the report is a little late this year because of what's happened with COVID-19, but it sets out our performance for last year, meeting the Council's priorities as they're set out in the corporate plan. Fifth paragraph 5, which is on page 8, and I hope I've got the page numbers right. I've been having a few computer problems this morning, so I haven't been able to access the agenda pack, but paragraph 5 sets out an overview of performance, so it tries to put all that data into its broader context, including any impact from COVID-19, which just started to show itself at the latter end of the financial year in March. As usual, Chair, I'll focus on the data tables, if that's okay with the panel. In my records, that starts on page 22. And again, as I've done in the past, I'll point out to the members on the panel the red indicators where the data points to that. And just to remind members that comments and explanations are included in the tables and also in the narratives at the beginning of each of the objectives. And also, again, just a reminder, what we're doing with this report is comparing performance against the set targets for last year and against the previous year's performance, so the performance of 2018-19. So the overall headline results, you'll find that on page 22 or page 1, if you're looking at the bottom right-hand corner. And we can see there that if we look at the pie charts, 43 out of the 78 indicators that had targets met them. So that's about 55%. And then 41 out of the 66 comparable indicators showed improvement or stayed the same compared to the previous year, and that's 62%. We also have the national indicator results in the report. That's the public accountability measures. And overall, we've got 67% of those meeting their targets and 50% improving or staying the same compared to the previous year. So what I'll do, I'll take each priority in turn. I'll start with safeguarding, which is on page 4, on the bottom right. And then I'll pause at the end of that to see if the panel have any questions. So the summary position again is set out in the pie charts on page 4, and they show that 62.5 of the indicators within this priority met the targets, and just over 56% improved or stayed the same compared to the previous year. Starting firstly with adult social care, first of all, I would refer to the panel to AS11, which you'll find on page 5. And AS11 shows that there were more adults aged 65 plus who received care and support compared to the previous year. That's nearly an 18% increase on the previous year. And the comment points out that this is actually consistent with the council's strategy to remodel more of its service delivery to focus on reablement, respite and complex care. The second indicator I would point out to the panel is on the next page. So that's page 6, and that's AS13A. And what that shows is that there were fewer adult carers who got an assessment in their own right compared to the previous year, and that's nearly a 15% decrease compared to that year. And the comment points out that work is being undertaken regionally to try and address this and to try and understand why adult carers might be refusing an assessment, although the pace of that work is going to be determined going forward by what's happening with COVID-19. And the last thing I would point to the panel in relation to adult social care is measure 19, which is going forward to page 16. So measure 19 shows that there's been an increase in the numbers of delayed transfers of care, an 11% increase compared to the previous year. But the comment makes reference to a rapid discharge project with the NHS to try and improve that particular situation. And then in terms of children's services, just 2 things I'd like to point out to the panel. So going back now on page 11, we're looking at CFS2, and that shows there's been an increase in the numbers of looked after children. There's been a 2.2% increase compared to the previous year. So we're talking about quite relatively small numbers overall. But you can see from the graph on the left-hand side of the page that there is an upward trend. And the comment points out that the numbers of children in institutional settings is down, and that the next phase of the lack reduction strategy should reduce those numbers further. And the final thing in terms of children's services is measure 24 on page 16. And what measure 24 shows is that there are fewer assessments of children being completed within the statutory timescales compared to the previous year. And you can see from the chart there that the 90% target has been missed for the last 3 years. And the comment acknowledges that this has been a difficult area to improve, but that a review has been completed and the monthly data is now starting to show signs of improvement. So I'll pause there, Chair, for the panel before I move on to the next one, which is education and skills.
Right. Are there any questions or comments with regards to the 2 issues, both adult and children's services? Anyone?
Yeah, I got just a comment really with regards to the adult, the adult carers assessments, not being taken up and so on. There's a move in social services for people to remain at home. That means, that there's more emphasis, or should we say pressure really, on adult carers. I'm just a little bit concerned really that there's such a backlog, if I can actually call it that.
I think, can I, Mary, did you want to say something?
Yes, please. It's again about the carers not taking up their carers assessment. It's what I'm concerned about is obviously with COVID, it's done over the telephone, and it is quite an in-depth phone call. But what I'm concerned about, it's not about the amount of people that's taking up, it's the quality of the service that's being provided after the take-up, because I have heard that although they've had the assessment, they just said, oh yeah, okay, thank you very much, and there doesn't seem to be any feedback as if they can access any services. So I'm a bit concerned about, yes, we want the assessments, but we also want an outcome from the assessments.
Okay. Anyone else? Can I say this is one of the issues that I want to discuss with Richard and about the corporate performance management. Now, we really can't expect an answer from Richard on these specific issues within the performance monitoring, because at the end of the day, Richard is responsible for the collation of all these facts and figures and the comments, etc. And as such, he's here to present them as the performance manager. The individuals' areas and the safeguarding adult and children services, we should actually write to the chairs of the various panels and ask them for their answers, for they are the ones that specifically are tasked with actually scrutinising those performances. We as a collective are here to challenge the process of the performance management, and that is something that I want us to discuss later on in the year, because I feel that is an issue which we need to ask Richard to come forward and discuss the process of the performance management, because the individuals, as you've rightly pointed out, the two questions are pointed out, are about the specific operation of those, and I think that's something that we need to sort of talk through with probably the Deputy Chief Executive and Richard about how we move forward with this, because numerous occasions we want to ask questions with regards to individual sections of this performance monitoring report, and we can't expect Richard to answer them. Okay, Richard, we'll keep a record of the questions that are asked by the Councillor Jeff Jones and Mary Jones. And Michelle has got them recorded, and then from that we'll then contact the various individuals. Des, you've put your hand up. Sorry, Paxton, you put your hand up.
Yes, Chairman. I'm not sure exactly what you're saying there. Obviously, in terms of the scrutiny performance panels, the chairman of those have got their jobs to do in that respect. Are you asking them to be reporting back to this committee, or?
No, what I'm saying, Paxton, is that we can't expect the manager or the corporate performance manager to answer the questions specifically of the various different departments. And I think that's an issue, that how do we get that information? And I think that's, is it collectively then? That's the point I'm getting at is this, Paxton. You might know the answer to that, but all the other people within this scrutiny board may not know the answers. So I think it's how do we get that answer?
Well, I think on that basis, in terms of what you're saying there, Chairman, it might well be that when we look at these reports, we look at decide on a specific area we want to look at, whether it's social services or whether it's education, and do that on a rotational basis and ask the head of service or director to come along as appropriate.
If that's a decision that we come to in the future, yes, this may well be true. Okay, Des Thomas. Councillor Des Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, our practice has been where these issues arise and we have specific questions on service delivery items, that we invite the head of that service to come and explain matters to us. As you quite rightly say, we can't expect Richard to have the detail of the services, and likewise we can't expect to have all the heads of services present at these meetings to ask any questions that might arise.
That's fair comment. Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Michelle, you put your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we could, in the past, some of the things that we've done is to actually just contact department when you've got a query about a particular one, or come to the next meeting and either get a written response or ask the head of that service to come along. I think we have to be a bit careful about calling departments in particular aspects, because of course the individual panels do that anyway. So we'd be duplicating some work there, I think.
Yeah.
I know that schools do their performance monitoring, don't they, as well as child and family, etc. So I think we'd have to be careful not to duplicate. But I'd say that we could contact, like with this one, I can contact the head of service and ask them to either come to the next meeting or to do a written response. So you could make a choice really about how much detail you want, really.
Okay, we've got 3 more questions now. Peter Jones, Councillor Peter Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Very quickly, this kind of discussion is exactly one that has concerned me, looking at the maintaining and enhancing Swansea's natural resources priority. I would intend that the Natural Environment Performance Panel should look at this report as it applies to them, where we can also ensure that we have relevant officers, particularly from the Nature Conservation Team, for example, to come and answer the questions that members will undoubtedly have. But by referring that kind of data to the relevant performance panel, we can at least ensure both a more informed discussion and the relevant officers there to answer any questions. So I thought that was the obvious way to proceed.
Okay, Mary Jones.
Yeah, I mean, I raised it because it was an important point, but I'm quite happy for a written response. And as you know, Chair, we've always done that because this is the overall performance panel for everything. And if we don't read, we're not all on different panels. So, we need to find out exactly what's going on. And I said a written response then is recorded. And I'm quite happy to have a written response.
Okay, Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yeah, likewise. I know Richard's got an horrendous job, actually, probably collating these figures, but referring back to, when the report starts, he actually lists considerations, and a lot of them are actually saying that things have changed between 2 periods. Many performance measures are new and definitions may need to be further refined. Some targets for new performance indicators are still being baselined. The results do not always account for changes in resources and workloads and so on. With regards to Richard, as I said, he must have an horrendous job here. The comments, especially, shall we say, with regards to change in resources or, workload and so on, I find that perhaps, I don't know if that goes through every indicator and so on. I know we've lost a lot of staff and so on, which must affect performance across the board. I don't know if Richard can perhaps comment on that.
Okay, I'll ask Richard to come back in a few minutes, but I've got Adam wants to say something first.
Yeah, it's just to say, obviously, your right is to interrogate these figures and make sure that you're happy as a scrutiny panel. Before we bring the officers in, I would prefer, if at all possible, to go for a written response. Just conscious that every time an officer gets to come to one of these panels, that could be 2 hours lost plus prep and so on. So, and I don't want to stifle debate or interrogation of officers, but there is a balance to be had. Each of these areas are also scrutinised by their own performance panel and own scrutiny areas. So the detail is also picked up there. And what I would try and prevent, if I could, is that the same officers being asked the same questions multiple times at different committees, just for their own time and commitment, really. So a written response is easier to put back. And then perhaps if that's not satisfactory, or there's one specific area which is a deeper concern, then perhaps we could pull an officer in at that point. It's just managing resources, especially at a time when staff are pulled in a lot of different directions. Okay, then Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to address Councillor Jeff Jones's particular point, that particular paragraph just sets out broad considerations. If there are any specifics to do with those items, then you will see that recorded in the comments of the particular performance indicator.
Okay, I think the feeling I get is that a written response, but I want this discussion to go a bit deeper for later on in a different meeting. But in the meantime, a written response would be fine for that one. Shall we move on now then to education and skills?
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, education skills, we're looking at the pie charts on page 22. So the first pie chart on the left, that shows that there was a split between the indicators meeting their targets and those that were within 5% of meeting the target. And there were quite a few indicators there showing a decline in performance set against the historical data. But as the pie chart on the right shows, nearly 53% of the indicators were not comparable to previous data because of changes to the way in which those particular results were calculated, which was introduced by the Welsh Government. The one indicator I would point the panel to this time around is on pages, it's actually two indicators on pages 29 and 30. So so that's around the SEN statements. So we have EDU 015A and B. So the targets to issue the SEN statements within the timescales are being missed by quite a wide margin, actually. The comment says that some improvements have already been made, and that further improvements will take place during this year to address the situation and obviously to prepare for the new act as well, the new AilNet Act. I'll pause there again for the panel.
Jeff, you've got your hands up again.
Sorry, I should have taken it down. I'll take it down.
Well, you haven't got a question for this. Anyone got a question for this? No. I will query the what's happened with this particular indicator, but I will ask Michelle to write and ask for a far more detailed understanding of this, because this is one thing that, you know, especially with special needs, we need to investigate more thoroughly. Okay, shall we move on then?
Thank you, Chair. So the next one is around the economy and infrastructure. So again, the graphs on page 35, they'll show that the majority of the indicators met their targets and showed improvement compared to the previous year. And there's nothing in this part of the report that I want to point out to the panel. I think that the comments adequately explain any issues, but again, I'll take any questions that the panel may have.
Are there any questions or comments on this particular section? No? Okay, so we move on then.
Okay, so the next section is tackling poverty. So we're now on page 42, and you see the graphs there. And they show that, again, the majority of the indicators met their targets, just over half improved or stayed the same compared to the previous year. What I would point the panel to two things. The first thing is on pages 43 and 44. So this is around the time taken to process housing benefit and council tax reduction claims. So that's HBCT01A and HBC201B. So the time taken to process those claims has increased compared to the previous year. Although the comments do point out that to some degree that was expected because of issues around staff reductions, and in the case of council tax reductions, a conscious decision to slow down processing in order to maximise the award of benefits. And the last indicator I would point to the panel on this one is on page 46. That's POV 10, where it shows that there are fewer people gaining employment through employability support compared to the previous year. That's a 9% decrease. And the comment there says that work is being undertaken as part of a commissioning review around employability, which also aims to better capture the results of employability activity from right across the council. And again, I'll pause there for the panel.
Any questions? I have a question, which Michelle will have to write about this last one about the employability. I think we need to understand what that actually means and who's doing what. Okay. If there's no other questions, we go on to transformation and.
Sorry.
Sorry,
Can I just ask, you know, on that specific point, with regards to Richard's role in collating these figures, it says with the comments, as part of the employability commissioning review, work is being undertaken to better capture the results. Are you actually involved in that, Richard? Do you advise them, or do they just do it themselves?
No, they do that themselves. We don't get involved in what they do in terms of that particular service. What we do though, when a performance indicator like this is created, we're asked that it's defined, and what each service will do is complete a definition record, which should show what particular activities are contributing to this particular indicator. So, you know, if it's the Workways project, for example, then that should be recorded within the definition. So I can certainly obtain the definition records and I can supply that to the panel, and that may help answer part of that question.
Actually, carrying on from that, so when people submit information to you, do you or can you question it at all, or do you just accept? You know, what's the process do you actually go through? Because, you know, there's a huge amount of work here and so on. So do they just actually submit the information to you and you accept?
Yes, they submit the information to us. We obviously do a sense check. So if something looks strange to us compared to, you know, previous results, for example, then that can prompt us to query it. But overall, we accept the data as is presented to us. But we do annual data quality checks where we take a sample of indicators and test them against the definition records.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay, then we move on to Transformation and Future Council.
Thank you, Chair. So the graphs on page 50, they show again that the majority of indicators met the targets and just over half improved or stayed the same compared to the previous year. And there's just one indicator which I would point the panel to in this section, which is on page 51, which is around staff sickness, which is CHR002. And the data is showing there that staff sickness has increased compared to the previous period and previous periods to that as well.
I don't know if anybody pass comment, because I'm not surprised that that figure hasn't shot up because of COVID-19 anyway. I'd be very surprised if it hadn't, and it would be a shock if it hadn't. Anyone else?
Sorry, Chairman, we're looking at...
Mary?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We must remember, though, this is prior to COVID, and maybe we need to look at it a little bit more in depth on our panel. But I agree with you about COVID, but a lot of this is pre-COVID, and it is worrying if it's at that high level. Then what is the next one going to show for Q1? So I would like a little more in-depth look at this, if possible, please.
Yeah, the difference is only 1.18, isn't it? 1.85% is the increase. The actual increase year on year is about the same, and we've noticed that from 2017, where the target was 8%, it had gone up in 2019 to 10, and again the target remained the same at 10%, but the increase is the actual result is 11.89. So that 1.89 increase down to COVID isn't that big a figure. I think the more worrying thing is the trend from 8 to 10 for the two previous years. And I think if there's a question to be asked, I think Adam is on the call, so Adam can answer that one in some formal letter or some sort of report to us in the future, because I think that's the issue. And I'd say the increase for COVID of 1.85 isn't as bad as I expected it to be. Okay, Paxton, you wanted to speak, I assume.
Yeah, thank you. I was only going to make the same point as Mary just made in terms of those figures being in the last financial year rather than in this year, when COVID will have impacted on that, obviously, then.
Yeah, but Adam?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think Mary sort of made the point that these are figures for 1920, so it was pre-COVID. So COVID doesn't really impact on these figures that you're seeing in front of you. One of the things that we did in the previous year was have a real focus on sickness, looking at both long-term and short-term, and it became an oversight of CMT to call people into account, look at what sickness levels are coming through, and see how we can manage it, working with Occy Health in order to get people through much more quickly, and identifying exactly what were the themes and the trends of sickness so that we could address them. So we got plans in the previous years that we were working to drive down those figures. And then, of course, this would be the year that we would put that all in. What you will see in Q1 actually is that there is a reduction in sickness, and we were also seeing that in the previous year in program we had, where people could work from different locations, so some working from home or alternative sites, thereby driving down some of that sickness because of the pressures of traffic and life and everything else, was helping people to have a different balance than perhaps previously. So the early indications of agile working were very positive in terms of supporting the reduction of people in sickness. We were also taking a firmer line, calling people in very early on into their sickness to make sure we were finding out what the issues were. Is it work related, home related, and working with people to reduce that. So although the trend was generally up, we were working hard in order to reduce that. As I say, this current year, you will see a reduction, but part of that will be very difficult to explain because, of course, with COVID, we've seen more people working from home. So people can obviously, if they have a sickness which would normally prevent them coming into the office, but may not prevent them from working, means that they could still work from home without having to take the sickness. So we still get that day's work from them without them having to claim a full day sickness, you know. So people perhaps first thing in the morning, to give a little bit more exact, you know, might feel a bit rough, will extend their day a little bit, so would stay at home working from home. Perhaps by 10 o'clock they've just shifted their day on and are okay to work. So we're seeing a better management of that sickness, and that will come again once we're a bit more out of COVID and some sort of normality in terms of programme.
Thanks, Adam. There is a note to the corporate performance. Note to the corporate performance team: data quality and review sickness figures impacted by COVID-19. That's why I said that comment earlier on. So obviously that isn't what in the comment is not exactly what you actually meant then.
Yeah, I think because COVID obviously hit us right at the end, so there would be a small impact on those figures, but it's not. You know, we can't put COVID down to a lot of the 11.85 because it was only towards the end, you know, hitting the March, by which time we'd got that last month. So, but we are continuing to look at service areas and how we can support sickness, working with occupational health.
Okay, I got Philip down and got his hand up.
Yeah, just a comment on that, Chair. So in the future, we can expect that to come down to yellow, as most of the people who are ill will work from home. And also, if I can recall, did we ask at some time that we wanted to look at these by department?
Yes, we did, Phil. We did ask for a breakdown of sickness from various departments. We have had it in the past, but there's no reason why we shouldn't have it again. Okay, Adam?
Yeah, that's great. We're happy to break that down. We have the data, so no problem at all in terms of looking at department by department and see where we go. Yeah, no problem.
Is that all right, Phil?
Yeah, that's fine, Chair.
Okay. Jeff Jones, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, really, you know, we're talking about by department. Can we have a breakdown by type of sickness as well? You know, is there an underlying problem with regards to me, with people actually working from home? They are less stressed. So I'm assuming that stress is one of the largest contributors to sickness. You know, is there any way we can have that sort of breakdown?
Getting through you, Chair. Yeah, every sickness that we have is recorded in terms of what the type of sickness is. So again, we have all that data. Musculoskeletal, I think, from memory, is one of the issues that we have, especially in and around sort of the bin operations and refuse, in terms of, you know, picking up bags and so on that perhaps are overweight that shouldn't be. So stress obviously is one that we do have as an indicator also, and we monitor that, and we'll work with occupational health, but happy to facilitate that breakdown.
Okay. Right, if there's no more questions, Richard, can we go on to...
Sorry, Chairman, I got my hand up there.
Oh, sorry, I didn't notice that.
Okay.
Sorry, Paxton, go on.
Just a quick question again, I guess. Basically, obviously, people working a lot more from home these days, or have been, that's for sure. What mechanisms are in place that when they say they're working from home, they book in to say they are, or whether they're not feeling well and taking a day off sick or whatever? What are the mechanisms for that? How does that work, Adam?
Again, through you, Chair, if I may. It's the same as it is always. If somebody is off sick, then they report in accordingly. We have in-touch days as well, whereby the managers keep in touch with all the staff. They have sort of a gathering where they check how people are. We also have one-to-ones, so we can again sense how the workforce is, what they're working on, and it's a different way of performance managing to what we'd normally be used to in terms of coming into the office. So the format is still the same. If you're taking a day off, you'd report it into your line manager, giving the reason why. You would self-cert as you currently do, and then if you need to stay off for longer, you would go through and get a doctor's note where applicable in order to stay off. But we are finding that there are fewer reports because people are able to flex a little more within their working day.
Okay.
Adam, do we use screenshots to check people working, the length of time people are on screen?
Yeah, we have within the system, we can see who's on screen as well. So we know who's there. The system also has an analytics behind it. So if we needed to, we can see the uptime of collaboration. We can see the uptime of use. But it's a kind of a different way of working. So it's more around performance management rather than because the computer's on doesn't mean people are necessarily working. But that's no different to being in the office. They could have the computer on and be down the corridor having a chat or having a coffee somewhere. So what we're working on is a type of performance management which is around the amount of work people are doing. So managers meet with their staff on one-to-ones or on team meetings, set a program of work that is reasonable and realistic, and then make sure that that's completed. So it's a performance-led management tool rather than just knowing if somebody's at a computer.
I understand that, but we have got screen time as well. Okay. Any other questions? No. Then can we move on, Richard, to nature and biodiversity?
Yes, certainly, Chair. So the graphs on page 58, they show that the indicator here met its target, and the one indicator that is comparable showed improvement compared to the previous year. There's no issues to report in terms of the data. The only thing I'd say in particular in relation to this priority is that we don't have a huge number of indicators within this particular area. So what we've tried to do is to plug that gap in a sense through more qualitative information. So within the covering report and within the comment at the start of the data, we've tried to provide some more information there so that people can track what's actually going on with this particular priority.
Okay, thank you. I assume, Peter, you want to say anything?
Yes, please, Chair, and thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Richard. I know he's got a problem in terms of the development of performance indicators, and I understand it's very early days in terms of this particular corporate priority. So I found the actual report extremely detailed and informative and helpful. Obviously, some of it relates to information returned to the Welsh Government under the Section 6 monitoring report, and work, of course, that is being developed both in terms of the nature conservation teamwork and elsewhere across the council. So I thought it very helpful. But the one question I would have for Richard, and no surprises, in terms of developing additional performance indicators, are you able, Richard, to give us any indication yet of what work is being done, what progress is being made, and what the nature of the additional performance indicators might be, bearing in mind the list in the corporate plan itself under the heading of how we will measure progress, which lists a number of things, some of which are specific sort of data type measures, and others which are more, if you like, qualitative or procedural, including, for example, the work of the Corporate Biodiversity Working Group. Thank you.
Certainly, yes, certainly, Councillor Jones. I mean, ordinarily, what we do at the the beginning of a financial year or in preparation for a financial year is that we start working on that particular year's set of performance indicators. The issue we had this year is that there was some disruption from COVID-19, which meant that a lot of the work that we were doing in terms of preparing for the new reporting year was disrupted. So when you see the first quarter report coming through this year, and obviously that's going to be reported later now, we're looking around about the October time for that, then you'll see that we've stuck with this year's performance indicators because of those particular issues. So what we're looking to do now is that we're looking to undertake a review shortly in terms of the indicators which are in the suite, and perhaps have a more encompassing and broader review as well in terms of the report. And these particular issues then will be captured as part of that review. But we did actually struggle on this particular priority. We did work with the Nature Conservation team on this, and we both committed to try and find a way around that. But it was quite difficult with this particular area in terms of trying to find something that we could report in a robust manner.
Yes, thank you, Richard, for that. I mean, I appreciate the point about the difficulty of identifying appropriate and measurable performance indicators. And it may well be into the future that we shall continue to rely on qualitative data, which in some ways is very much in the nature of the particular priority rather than measurable data. But yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Richard, do you want to move on?
Thank you, Chair. So the final part of the report was around the national indicators, the public accountability measures. And the graphs on page 61, as I mentioned earlier on, showed that the majority met their targets and half improved or stayed the same compared to last year. A lot of the indicators in this report, the ones that I would point to the panel, I've already pointed out to because they're reproduced here really. The only additional one I would point the panel to is on page 66, which is PAM 15, which is around the DFGs. And what that particular indicator shows is that it's taking longer to deliver a DFG compared to the previous year. There's been a 19.5% reduction in performance compared to the previous year. But the comment mentions that this was due to a combination of factors, and it cites staff sickness, vacancies, and the start of the impact as well of COVID-19 on the supply chain.
Okay, it's surprising that we only had a month of COVID, as we've already pointed out about the sickness. Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. PAM, the best way to put it, PAM 39, page 75, about rent loss. Can we write afterwards and ask if we could introduce a performance indicator on the number of empty council houses? For one way of looking at the performance of the HPU. That's one. And,
right.
And the other one is on page 78, PAM 45. Is this additional dwellings created a result of being, is that the empty property grants that we introduced?
I think part of it, but I think the other thing is then is also about the living over shops, that issue. But I think the best thing is to write and ask
to them and get explanation. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Richard, is there anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Have any members got any comments or questions? No. Okay, well, thank you, Richard, but we will be back in contact because there's a couple of issues. Like, we want to know, well, I'll explain to you when I'll have a face-to-face with you when we'll go into what performance issues for a meeting to discuss the process of performance management, okay?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to come to the panel and discuss that.
Okay, right, can we then move on? the next item on the agenda is, I believe, letters. I got to find my way back to that now. Okay. Right, there's the budget monitoring for the first letter is the budget monitoring for third quarter of 1920, which seems an awful long way away now. Then we go on. Then there's the we had a reply from the Cabinet Office regarding who the Cabinet Council shares data with. The next letter. And that was from the leader. And then with the next one then was to Councillor David Hopkins about delivery and performance. And then we had a reply. Oh, sorry, we haven't. And then we sent another one then about how we fix those replies. Any questions on the letters? No. Okay. Go back to the
Chair.
agenda proper. Yeah, go on.
Coming on those letters, just slightly cheekily, but it will save you asking in a written letter. I have, whilst been on the call, checked the figure that Councillor Jeff Jones asked me earlier. His presumption of around 5 million is correct. I've been able to find that the figure was £4.7 million in relation to arrears for the last liability year, and I've sent Michelle through a note of that for the minutes. It will save a letter and a reply with your indulgence if you're content with that, Chair. So apologies for interrupting your flow.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Are you is everybody happy with that reply from Ben?
Yep.
Okay.
I think it's
then
pardon? I said I think it's very good. The Evening Post quite accurate sometimes.
Yeah. Okay, Jeff. Are you selling them now or what? There we are. They'll be delighted to hear that. Right, I've lost my agenda now. I don't know what's happened to it. It's disappeared off that thing. Right. Are there any other issues or comments about the agenda? We've done the letters. Anything else? Michelle, have you got anything to add?
No. Just the work programme I sent round just to have a look at informally has changed a little bit but I'll send that round again anyway. We've shifted a couple of things round based on people's ability to attend. So, but I'll send that around.
Okay. If nobody's got any other questions or comments, then I wish you all goodbye and please enjoy the sun like Councillor Mary Johnson could sit in the garden. Like.
I know,
at least recording now.
At least the tractors didn't go past when I was speaking.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you
All
all.
the best.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Chair. Bye-bye.
Ta-da.
See you. Bye.
Bye.